Greetings! In today's little news video, I want to take a look at the new colors that Daniel Smith has announced for 2025. They've recently released info on 6 new colors that will be added to their range of watercolors, and I was really curious to check out what they have in store for us. I don't have the paints, they're not out yet, but I went around and found some swatches and pigment info, and then I used that to reference to other colors and pigments so that I could get a feel for what the colors are going to be. Amongst the new colors, there are 2 that are named Jaune Brillant number 1 and Jaune Brillant number 2. If you've looked at other ranges of colors, you've seen these named before. These colors have been part of Holbein's range for many years. I think Shinhan has them too. I also know that Old Holland has a Brilliant Yellow, which is, the translation of Jaune Brillant. So yeah, not unique colors per se, but I'm a bit surprised that they were not part of the Daniel Smith range already. I went to the website Under the Brush to look at what other Jaune Brillant colors were available. Of course, not all of them are swatched, but it's always a good place to look if you want to get a feel for the colors. And as you can see, there's a lot of variance between all the Jaune Brillant, whether it's the number 1 or the number 2. We'll take a look at Jaune Brillant number 1 first. It is a mix of 2 pigments. So we have a yellow pigment, PY65, and a white pigment, PW6. As such, it's probably going to be a color that is somewhat opaque or semi-opaque because of the presence of the white pigment. If we take a look at the PY65 pigment, we can see that it's fairly consistent. It's a bright, warm yellow. It's quite a nice color on its own. Jaune Brillant number 1 is definitely a convenience color because if you want to get this kind of lighter value for this yellow, all you have to do is dilute the main pigment, the yellow pigment, with water. Also, if you reference just this one with the other Jaune Brillant, you can see that it's somewhat unique in its formula. Not a lot of the other colors have, actually none of the other colors have this exact pigment composition. So in that sense, that's interesting, but I'm not entirely sure just how useful this color would be. Then we have Jaune Brillant number 2. This one is also a mix of 2 pigments, so we have PO62 and orange pigment, and again PW6, white pigment, titanium white, opaque white. So again, a color that is probably going to be more on the opaque side of things rather than the transparent side of things. Now for this one, I found a color that had the exact same composition. It is White Nights or Nevskaya Palitra's Naples Flesh. This swatch is from Under the Brush, and as you can see, it goes fairly opaque in the mass tone. It's an interesting color, but nothing particularly unique or unusual. It's hard to tell with swatches on a computer screen, but as you can see, the swatch from Daniel Smith is quite similar to the swatch from Under the Brush, so I would expect these colors to be very, very similar. Next color from Daniel Smith is Coral Reef. So to keep up with the trend, it's another color that is a mixture of a pigment and white. This time we have pigment orange 73 and PW6, again, the same titanium white, opaque white. So the resulting color is this sort of peachy, corally light pink color. It is quite warm, or it seems to be if just looking at the swatch, and it's definitely more of a convenience color. I was also able to find another paint with the exact same pigment composition as this one. It is the Holbein Shell Pink. It's a Holbein Japanese company. They have this color named Shell Pink that is exactly the same pigment as the Coral Reef from Daniel Smith. So as you can see, on this swatch from Under the Brush, it is a bit opaque at the mass tone. It is a really beautiful, warm, light pink color, but as with the other 2, nothing particularly unusual. If you look at the swatches of the Daniel Smith and the Holbein color, just from these swatches, the Holbein one seems to be a bit more warm, and the Daniel Smith one seems to be a bit more pink, but it's really difficult to tell with these, unless you have like the painted swatches in front of your eyes. From personal observation, I've always felt like Daniel Smith, they go a bit too far when editing their online swatches, and they're not always a good representation of the color, so I would really wait until actual swatches are available to compare colors. Next color is something perhaps a bit more interesting. It's their earthy light red, and this one is made from pigment red 290, so PR 290. It is a fairly unique color, so this one is super interesting for that. There's only one other paint available with that pigment as far as I know, and it's from Roman Schmal. It is their ginger red. I have the info for the ginger red on screen. Under the brush doesn't have a swatch yet for this color, so I took the swatch from Roman Schmal that I could find. And as you can see, it is a beautiful, warm, deep orange color, if I can say that. It is fairly unique. Not a lot of ranges have that specific pigment. So far, only Roman Schmal and soon Daniel Smith. If you compare the two swatches, again, they're quite different. On these particular images, the Roman Schmal one looks more saturated and vibrant. But like I said, this is not exactly helpful because these are both edited images that were not scanned or photographed in the same context. You really have to wait for someone to actually compare physically the swatches and document that to be able to tell if there's a difference between these. Anyway, moving on to the next color. Daniel Smith is adding Manganese Violet to their range. Manganese Violet PV16 is a beautiful purple granulating color. It is somewhat of a temperamental color. I have worked with this particular pigment and it's difficult in the sense that it doesn't age really well. The dry paint tends to get harder and more difficult to re-wet if you leave it untouched for long. So I'd be curious to see how this tube paint fares on a palette in the long run, but it is a beautiful color and I really like that granulation. I picked a selection of other manganese violets from under the brush and you can see that there's still somewhat of a bit of variance in the colors. They don't seem to be exactly the same. I think the yellows we saw earlier, the PY65, they were more even in hue, while these manganese violet, they look to me as if they shift a lot depending on the paint maker, the pigment, and all of that. So I'd be curious to see how this pigment from Daniel Smith compares to the other manganese violet. But yeah, as you can see, definitely not a unique color. This is not something that was particularly hard to find in other ranges. And then the very last color of this release, the sixth color, is Cobalt Green Deep PG26. It is a really interesting, a really beautiful deep green color. It is just a tiny bit muted and also has a really interesting granulation. It's not particularly unique. Again, it is something that you could find in other ranges, other places. Still nice to have it, available in the Daniel Smith range for the people who really like to get their paints from this particular brand. But yeah, it is a color that is out there and it is beautiful. It is a really nice color, but nothing that is particularly unique or special. You can see that there's a bit of a variance in hue between these colors as well. I know that cobalt green can fluctuate a bit, so it would be interesting to see where exactly the pigment that Daniel Smith uses fits within these green colors. And that's it for my roundup of these. I'm sorry I don't have any more info, but for now, that's really all that's available. If you want to get these colors, if there's something in there that really speaks to you, I'll put the link in the description. Check out the Merry Artist if you live in the US. They have these colors available in pre-order. They sell them at a really good price. And for that, I would really look into this. Also, always nice to support a small business. I'll also have the links to Merry Artist's Instagram page and also Under the Brush, because that's the main resource I use to look up if a paint had, dupes or what pigments were in there and all of that. So really interesting resource, link in the description. Please check it out. And let me know if there's any of these colors that you are particularly interested in getting. For me, it's always the same. Daniel Smith is just way too expensive where I live, so I don't reach for it. Thank you so much for watching this watercolor news video. I hope that was interesting, and we'll see each other in the next one. Take care. Bye bye.